Hello, my name is Brian Dalpiaz. I teach mathematics at Spoon River College, and I have for more than 23 years now. In this college-themed video, I'm going to talk about the importance of proof. Given specific information, how can you use deductive logic to arrive at the proper conclusion? By the time a math major gets to grad school, it seems like just about everything is about proof. After a while, it seems like you're proving one thing just for the purpose of being able to prove something else. I didn't really appreciate or understand what this was actually doing for me at the time. Uh, as it turns out, proving all these abstract mathematical ideas was training my brain in rational thought, deductive logic, communication, and demonstration. It reminds me of the Karate Kid with wax on and wax off. In the movie, Mr. Miyagi was supposed to be teaching Daniel LaRusso karate, but instead he had him doing a bunch of chores like waxing cars, painting fences, sanding floors. By doing these chores, Daniel was actually using the same motions and building muscle memory, um, and he was enhancing his karate skills and didn't even know it. I think I first recognized the importance and applicability of proving techniques that I was learning to other areas when law schools would come to our college specifically to recruit graduate level math students. This wasn't just for our abilities to understand mathematics or statistics, but also because we were well trained at using logic and reasoning, making valid deductive arguments, recognizing invalid arguments, flaws in arguments, misinterpretation of facts, contradictory ideas, and so on. In graduate school, by continually and carefully constructing proof after proof in many of my math courses at a very disciplined, rigorous level, I had actually developed my skills to use and communicate deductive logic and reasoning. Proofs are a math major's wax on, wax off. But I'm going to talk about the importance of proof to everybody as a filter for truth. We each have a filter for processing information, and I'm going to talk about three major ways. We filter information that's incoming, we filter information that's outgoing, and we filter information within or internally. With incoming information, we are constantly bombarded with this, constantly bombarded with articles and information. Much of this information is unfortunately misinformation, and it's important that we all have an effective filter to separate the falsehoods from the facts. Many people believe they have an effective filter, but this filter is too often made from personal bias. People too easily dismiss information that may be true if it goes against their current beliefs, but they tend to quickly accept false information if it supports their own biases and opinions. This is problematic as it leads to people quickly sharing bogus articles and information, propagating actual fake news, which ends up spreading like a highly contagious disease. At a minimum, this leads to false beliefs and to misunderstandings, but at a maximum, this can begin an unhealthy, vicious spiral that can devolve into dangerous, violent, even deadly consequences. We've seen these kinds of events repeatedly throughout history, and we're witnessing events like this today. It's critically important to our own health and to the health of our society and country that we each work to maintain a healthy filter. Don't too easily accept information without proof. Be an open-minded skeptic. Think rationally and reasonably about new ideas. This requires that we are all mindful of our own biases, that we are skeptical not only of information that's contradictory to our opinions and beliefs, because that's easy, but also that we're skeptical of information that supports our opinions and beliefs. That's harder and takes a committed effort, but is essential to a healthy filter. When it comes to outgoing information, this is really about communication. Things can get lost in translation. It was right in my head, but by the time it went from my brain to my mouth to your ears to your brain, something was amiss. It's important to organize our thoughts and to clearly communicate what we are trying to say. You've probably heard of the phone game, maybe even have done it before, where you have a line of people and the first person whispers something into the second person's ear, that person then repeats it into a third person's ear, and so on down the line. by the time it gets to the last person and he repeats the sentence aloud, it's often completely different than the original sentence. I mean, this is no big deal with a silly sentence, but if we're trying to communicate something important, it's crucial that we do so completely and correctly. Too frequently, people misquote information that was originally correct. For example, within the last few months, it was reported that in a study, 85% of people hospitalized with COVID had worn masks. Now, if this was a representative sample of our population, and that's a big if, but if it was, it could justifiably be deduced that 85% of people with COVID had worn masks. Some people, including leaders in this country, however, stated this result incorrectly. They stated it as showing that 85% of mask wearers get COVID. That's not an equivalent statement. Saying that 85% of victims are mask wearers is not the same thing as saying 85% of mask wearers are COVID victims. To understand why these statements are not equivalent statements, consider the fact that about 90% of murders are committed by men. This does not mean that 90% of men commit murders, but that would be the same logic being used. Obviously, it's invalid logic. That's ludicrous. That's clearly not true. 90% of men are not murderers. So we all need to carefully and correctly communicate our thoughts, especially when it comes to important information. And then there's the internal dialogues. These are the thoughts and ideas bouncing around in your mind. This is where you're processing information and forming opinions and continually developing your own identity. Figuring out who you are and how you fit into this world. Identifying your strengths and weaknesses. Struggling with your fears, worries, anxieties. Forming your goals and ambitions. Trying to realize what it is you want to get out of life. And this may be the most important application of proof there is. To prove who you are to yourself. One of my favorite quotes comes from a cartoon movie, The Iron Giant. In this movie, the boy Hogarth tells the giant, "You are who you choose to be." I love this quote because it's simple, it's profound, it's true. I can't count the number of times I've heard students and people say, "I'm not a math person," or "I suck at math." And it's natural to doubt your abilities, especially if you've failed at certain things. What too many people don't realize, however, is a little secret I'm going to tell you. Everybody fails. It's part of life. It's essential to growth and progress. It's how we learn. I'm sure you've heard the stories of Michael Jordan being cut from his varsity basketball team, or Albert Einstein being identified as mentally slow as a child, or Thomas Edison being labeled by his teachers as too stupid to learn, or the other many similar stories of successful people that are out there. The important thing about failure is to learn from it, to grow from it, to recognize it doesn't mean you are incapable of something just because you can't do it now. I remember taking keyboarding when I was in junior high, and I think this was, well, not in junior high, but in high school, where I first kind of learned how the brain worked. But in junior high, I took keyboarding, and my mother was the teacher, and she was a very fast typist. I couldn't understand how she and other people could remember where all those keys were to type so quickly and accurately. I was convinced that there was no way I could do this. My brain just wasn't wired that way. Maybe for them, but not for me. I just wasn't like that. So I hunted and pecked my way into a low B in the course and was done with it. And never really learned how to type at that point. I knew I couldn't do it, so I didn't really even try. And it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. A few years later, I took typing in high school. This time I decided to approach things a little bit differently. Maybe it was impossible for me to learn to type, but I would not know for sure unless I tried. So I wanted to prove to myself whether I could or could not do it. I still had my doubts and I was not very confident that it would work, but decided to see it through. From day one, I did everything the teacher, my mom, again, said to do, and it's important to listen to your mom. I practiced learning the keys little by little, performing the exercises as she assigned, building the muscle memory. And then I realized how my brain was processing all this new sensory information. I could feel the keystrokes, the rhythm of the typing. I could see the keys as I fell asleep at night. And lo and behold, I learned how to type quickly and accurately. I was amazed at how well it worked. I ended up proving to myself that I could actually do it, and also that limitations often exist only in our own minds. The biggest obstacle to me and to most people resides between our ears. And how we process and respond to failure directly affects who we think we are. To quote Yoda from Star Wars, "The greatest teacher failure is." Another quote I love from movies here. Things may be challenging, and you may fail when you first try, but that proves nothing. Don't make the mistake of identifying yourself by your failures. With the right attitude, effort, and focus, I guarantee you will prove to yourself that you are far more capable of much more than you realize. I hope I've given you something to think about. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.